Welcome to the Teaching Journeys podcast, hosted by Dave Roberts. Humanity possesses a unique skill, the ability to pass knowledge from one generation to the next. This podcast embraces that ability, offering learning opportunities through conversations with extraordinary guests. Dave aims to leave a positive mark on individuals around the world. So before you dive into today's episode, please share this podcast with your network, including friends, family, and colleagues. And please consider leaving a rating or review. Your support makes all the difference.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Teaching Journeys podcast. I'm your host, Dave Roberts, and today it is my pleasure to have as my guest, Diane Kahn. Diane is an educator with over 20 years of teaching experience, including inside San Quentin State Prison, where she led the Academic Peer Education Project. Her work centers on the power of education as a tool for agency, critical thinking, and transformation. She co-authored the effort that brought rehabilitative achievement credits to California, expanding access to educational opportunities for incarcerated learners. In 2017, Diane co-founded Humans of San Quentin to amplify lived experience through storytelling, a platform now featuring more than 3,000 stories from all 50 states and globally. She holds a master's degree from the University of San Francisco and is deeply committed to reimagining education as a pathway to dignity, purpose, and lifelong learning. And everything in your bio, Diane, I can get alongside of that because it mirrors my philosophy on education and on treating those individuals who are availing themselves of educational opportunities. So with that, welcome to the Teaching Journeys podcast. I've been looking forward to our conversation for a while now.
Oh, it's wonderful to be here, and thank you for having just such compassion and open heart. So I look up to you being a parole officer and where you've been. So, and your education. So I'm more than happy to get this conversation going. Thank you for having me.
Well, you're welcome. And I happened to find you through pure serendipity. There was something I think I was posting, it might have been on LinkedIn, about Humans of San Quentin, and I was immediately intrigued. So I went to your website, saw the work that you were doing, with incarcerated learners, with humans behind bars, and it was just like, wow. I was just very inspired. I said, I got to get Diane on the podcast, and I'm just so grateful that you accepted my invitation to join me today.
Nice. It's an honor. Thank you.
You're welcome. My first question for you is tell our audience about the experiences that have shaped your life path and your passions today.
I think the one thing when I look at my path in life, I think it's hard to say, but when I've really dug into it, I don't have a lot of fear and I don't have a lot of trauma. So walking into a prison setting for me was never really fearful. Where there's a lot of people that I talk to that are just, their mouth opens when they find out where I've been or where I go each week. So I think that was a really big start for me to have the perspective that I have. Another thing that I think keeps this work positive for me is that I've never really been a negative person. And when you've been in prison or you're in really repressive environments for a really long time, it's hard to sustain that work. There's one statistical fact that hits me hard, and they say the average life of a correctional officer in a prison setting after they have retired is 5 years. So it really shows you the damage that's being done, not only to those people incarcerated, but those of us serving them. My time in prison, my time inside, speaking with men and women one-on-one, to me, is a positive gift. For me to be able to sitting with someone, having them open up about what's happening in their life is, I feel honored. Having not any kind of therapy or any kind of background whatsoever in psychology, it's amazing that people really want to sit down and share what's happening. And I think the biggest gift that I see is when I go into prisons and I interview someone. It's like you and I today, we sit down and say, how are you doing? So that's always the first thing I do. It's normal. How are you doing? And it's going to make me tear up. I don't know if I'm able to get through the sentence to say this, but they'll cry. People in prison aren't asked how they are. If you sit down with them and you're a free person, for lack of better words from the outside, and you're willing to sit down with them and then with us in front of a camera, many times it's to talk about their crime and who they were and not who they are today. So the long and short of my journey that got me here, I think was a healthy upbringing, a healthy outlook. And then I've been a teacher, so I've always taught second and fourth grade. So when I found out the University of San Francisco had a presence inside San Quentin, I jumped at it. So I first started going in teaching men in the morning, and we built curriculum. And then the afternoon, we would bring in a free teacher and pair them up with, we can't call them teachers inside because they can't have that class differentiation. They were mentors, so we would pair them up together, and then we would teach guys to get their high school diploma. Hugely educational for me, and I felt like it was a disservice to our free population to not share with everybody the lives that I was meeting inside.
Yeah, and I mean, just the power of asking somebody how they're doing just cuts through all the labels, the preconceptions that many in society have about individuals who are incarcerated for crimes, just to take an interest in them as a human being and maybe be able to see to their soul, I think is one of the best ways to make a connection with anybody. And it cuts through whatever walls they've built up to stay safe.
Yeah, completely.
And, I remember for me, there was a family member who was dying of cancer and she was in the hospital. And one of the stereotypes, Diane, with males is that males don't deal with feelings or we just learn to suck it up and we take care of everybody else. But I was really hurting. And that nurse came up to me and said, Dave, are you okay? And I almost lost her right there because she was the first nurse that didn't assume that just because I was a male, I was strong enough to deal with what I was dealing with.
Oh.
And she just asked me, how are you doing? How are you okay? And I choked up and I looked at her. I said, I'm okay, but I really wasn't doing okay. But the fact that she had asked me that just cut through just all the stereotypes or the perceptions that many in society have about males and their expression of feelings and their ability to just kind of handle stuff for their families and everybody else around them. And, that in and of itself in many ways is a misconception.
Oh, completely. It's amazing that it feels like in our society, we've had to cage humans to give them the opportunity to be introspective.
Yeah.
See a lot of that. I was in San Quentin yesterday, and the flavor around there, and I won't take full credit for Humans of San Quentin because there's a lot of wonderful rehabilitation happening in that prison, but we've really made it okay and vulnerable to talk about your feelings. Um, and it's brought this levity to it. So I have a good story. So Michael Moore is our inside communications director, and he's walking up the steel stairs, which you see in the movies. And there's this guy walking down the stairs in their chair, and he's like pumping his fist. And he looks at me, he's like, "What's going on?" And he's like, "I just got my packet back from Humans of San Quentin." And he's like, "I feel heard. I feel seen." So we've had a lot of people write to us that, we're going to commit suicide prior to them sharing their story, us truthfully putting it up and delivering exactly who they are. And then what we do is we make sure that every comment and every like that is put out, we take copies of and obviously make them anonymous and send them inside so they can actually see it. There's people out here that care and see and feel. And that, for me, exactly what you're talking about, Dave, is just human dignity.
Yeah.
We should be giving that to each other. So it's been really nice to see it evolve in all different parts of our society.
Yeah, and our society, I think, needs to embrace values that are based on love and compassion, inclusivity, seeing beyond the label and looking at the person, um, and realizing that every person, regardless of decisions they've made in their life, deserve to be treated with dignity, deserve to be treated with respect. If we can incorporate a lot of these characteristics, a lot of these values, we can be able to see more similarity than difference.
Yes. And you and I were talking about it earlier. I think our society is changing. So when I was growing up, it was Bill Clinton, 3 strikes, you're out, lock them up. What's nice now is we work with a lot of interns. So when I first started this project, my kids were in high school and a couple just starting college. And we literally started this on my kitchen table. We got approved right before the pandemic hit. And The kids that we're raising today are into wellness. They're into pronouns. They're into, it's very often that you sit down at a table now, or if you're going over to someone's house, they instantly ask you, do you have any allergies? When I was growing up, allergies didn't seem to be as prevalent, but you also didn't care about those things, right? There were terminology and words that we use that you shouldn't be using now, today, sensitivity to it. So I feel like the population of kids in their 20s now accept us. There's all the stigmatisms that and narration that's been put on our media that has been dumped on us aren't there. They're very much open to people being human beings. So it's made this work for me much easier.
Yeah, and I think the young people of America are our future anyway. And I tell my students, I can learn as much from you as I can teach you. And don't think for a minute you haven't got something to teach me. You always have something to teach me.
Right.
And it sounds like you're also creating that kind of collaborative learning environment where your students become your teachers and vice versa.
Yeah.
And it just cuts through a lot of back in the day, we talked about the generation gap and, older people didn't understand young people and vice versa. But today, bringing young people together in a very diverse community, I think cuts through all of that. And it just brings us all together as a community of very, very diverse, but yet very impactful voices.
Yeah. And it brings like a life of activism. So I notice a lot of our interns in college now, you see them out and about, like they'll be posting on different social media where they are and what they're fighting for. And I think also goes to when you've got this, naturally narcissistic person that is keeping themselves alive, and then you give them in their teenagers this identity out of themselves or the idea that they can give back or actually put themselves in someone else's shoes. It's huge. It's absolutely huge. The trajectory that it shifts in their life. It'll be interesting to see where a lot of our kids that have left our intern program here, what they end up doing in their life. Because so many of them tell me, oh my gosh, this is only because of Humans of San Quentin that I'm doing this. And they also feel empowered, right? They can go on their college campuses and have a voice that they may not have known was there prior.
Yeah. And every student, and I tell my students at Utica University, you have a voice, use it. Use your voice with me. Challenge me if something doesn't sound correct to you, and I'm fine with that. That's how we learn. That's how we create meaningful dialogue. And that's how we learn to understand critical thinking. So, which is why when I read about Humans of San Quentin and your particular bio, it's just your bio and what the work you're doing just aligns with my philosophy. So I'd ask you a question. What do you specifically see in humans behind bars that many in society don't see?
Number one, forefront is I've never sat down with someone in prison who wasn't a victim first. So that's who we're caging. Our society is not set up to help people with mental illness, with lack of education, those people that are poor. We're not taking care of our youth. So basically what people are seeing out here is the people that we're caging. So they're very similar to people that we've seen every day. Those that are poor, uneducated, mentally ill. So that's was my big impetus to start this nonprofit, was to share that they're just like you and I. They have problems. And I think people are surprised that they'll say, oh, you can obviously go in there and meet with your team whenever you want. It's like, no, I've got to let them know a semester ahead. They've got to get out of work. They've got to get out of the classes that they're offered. They've got to get around those things that they enjoy doing inside, whether it's, cooking or whatever they want, or running, they're doing a marathon, or I'm now in there and I play pickleball with them. So they very much, and they've got to manage families. So many of them are parents behind bars. So their life is just as complex as ours is out here, and obviously more so. But that was my big thing, is to show people that they're just like you and I. And then a lot of people say to me, well, what about this extreme and that extreme? And I always tell them again and again, those people that you see typically on our news stations is maybe 1%. Those that are really, really that ill. And yes, they need to be taken out of the general population. Do they need to be caged? No. Can they still do good things for society? Yes. They need to be healthy for those people that are close to them or for those of us seeing them. Do we need to give them all the liberties we have out here? Hell no. But they do need to be given something that will then make all of us healthier. Like I talked about early on about the officers, right? I mean, their lives aren't healthy. They're not surviving once they get out here. Many of them are filled with trauma. So, does that answer your question?
Sure does. But yeah, it's easy to lose sight of the fact that they have issues just like we do. And I think you're right that many of the individuals I worked with in addiction who had histories of interaction with the legal system, a lot of it was alcohol and drug related. But these were individuals that came from unhealthy homes. They were abused, physically, emotionally, sexually. They were victims. And as you know, a lot of times, Diane, with the victim cycle, it tends to perpetrate itself. The victim becomes the victimizer because that's what they know and that's how they play out the trauma that they've experienced because they've had no other coping skills shown to them or instilled in them that can help them deal with it any other way. But the fact that you put prison and all of a sudden you got all these stigmas that go along with that. And like you said, there's a percentage that may not be capable of rehabilitation, that don't deserve to be, that don't warrant being in the general population because of their history and other circumstances. But it doesn't mean you don't treat them with dignity anyway.
Exactly. And you explained that so well. You really painted out that intergenerational trauma. It was nice to hear you say what it is that leads them there. And yes, we are caging drug addicts.
Yeah.
So and they're not given the chance to rehabilitate that.
No.
Right? They're not given life experiences that led them there in prison. They can take classes, they can teach themselves. So when you, like you're alluding to, here they are let out, they've got this stigmatism, they've got this felony on them. People are hesitant to hire them. They don't have money. Most of them have lost their family. From what I hear from the people that I've interviewed, after 10 years, if you were lucky enough to have any family or friends in your life, they're gone. And then they're released and they're put out in the world. So, yes, our recidivism rate is high because we're not dealing with the problems while we have them. And this is, hopefully, I can interject here what I see as a possible solution. I don't know that I'll see it in my lifetime. But what I would love is the day that someone is cuffed and put in a car, they would actually turn from that front seat and look back to them and see who they've got. Are you drug addicted? Are you poor? Are you uneducated? You don't have any job skills? And deal with it there. And then work on it. And then after we've completed that, then we let them go. We talk to them, right? We give them certain tests. We go through everything we have to do to make sure that they are ready for society.
And I think for me, and I know before we started recording, I told you about one of my first jobs was being a probation officer for the Stop DWI program in my local county. I was mandated by the director, you need to find treatment options for individuals who are offenders and who have an alcohol issue or other drug issue rather than incarceration. And one of the things that I've always thought is that it's kind of ironic that the person goes to prison to be rehabilitated, but yet in order to survive, they have to engage in behavior that is not normative in general society. So that environment doesn't provide rehabilitation. So when they go out and are expected to follow the same rules, they haven't been prepared adequately for going back out into society. So they become traumatized because of that, and they may end up committing a crime just to get back into prison because it's an environment that, though chaotic, they know how to handle that. They were at least had a purpose, or they had a spot in that community, which to me was kind of like, I never thought prison to be rehabilitative unless there were programs like you're offering and coping skills that you're offering that can prepare them once they're done with paying their debt to society. They go back out and they become productive citizens, and they're leaving tracks of legacy that can go on from generation to generation to generation.
And that coupled with a whole world that you know about that I don't know. But many times once they're released, if they're put into their same town, into the same environment, into the same house, boom, they're going back to it. So, I mean, I've interviewed people that are in prison because they have nowhere to go. They're going to be homeless. Many, states and prisons don't have anywhere for them to go. So, like you said, they're going to be out on the street. So, I mean, for anybody listening, we need those, and you have a better word for it than I do, rehab houses or halfway houses that people need to be able to go to so they have support. People like you and I coming in, or just people in the neighborhood that hopefully will treat them differently and offer them jobs and then let them get on their feet.
Yeah. I want to shift for a minute to Humans of San Quentin. I know you co-founded that.
hmm
What is the mission of Humans of San Quentin? And how has the work that you've done and the individuals who have told their stories, how has that redefined the perceptions that society has about humans behind bars?
So, first of all, our mission is twofold. One is to share voices from people inside, but secondly is to educate people on the outside and destigmatize what the media painted the picture of someone being incarcerated. And your second question was, how has it changed people out here?
Mm-hmm.
Part of my mission is to get in front of as many people as I can. And not me. I'm not a good public speaker, nor do I like being in front of big crowds, but this work has been calling me for somehow. So here I am. So I refuse to ever go anywhere without getting up with someone who's previously incarcerated. So just last Friday, Joe Crowder, he was one of our first employees, and I knew him inside. He shared his story. And when he came out, he came to work for us as a editor, but also I think he was more of our intellectual property, and still is today, for what he can offer with lived experience inside. So Joe and I get up in front of, been on a number of different stages and talk to people. This last week, we're at a local high school here, Branson School, and we're with the young people. We also brought in 4 of our interns that are in school there that got up with us, and that combination, I think, is just magic. So the amount of people that can identify on one layer or another is moving. There's not one person that we haven't talked to, and there's thousands upon thousands of them that don't just sit there and just say, "What can I do?" I didn't know that. I didn't know that I could be in the same room with a murderer and have compassion for that person. So it's been startling. It's been absolutely startling. You and I have talked about how there's not a lot of rehabilitation happening in prisons. And it's a net that's really hard to break. In fact, I had a meeting on the Warden's Advisory Committee inside San Quentin, or the Volunteer Advisory Committee that the warden heads up for us. And they have given funding to different programs like ours, and we got a large grant from them simply to keep up what we're doing in order to rehabilitate. So that's a huge testament that the state is willing to step up and support all these programs that are inside in California. And I'm sure they're happening in other states as well, but I'm not as privy to that information. But it's amazing. It's amazing. And I think at the end of the day, it's making our communities safer. Right? I mean, you have direct knowledge on this that I don't. But if you can rehabilitate somebody and give them the services they need once they're released, they're not going to commit those crimes again. So we're not safer locking them up. In fact, Joe just talked last Friday, and he talked about prison being a monster factory. So you put someone in there, you don't deal with their issues, you don't deal with their trauma, and it's going to come out worse, like that correctional officer I was telling you about in the beginning. So we're not doing a service to ourselves. So our biggest impact is educating people out here, treat people differently when you hear they've been previously incarcerated, and offer them that job.
Makes perfect sense. It's just common sense to do that. Find out what they need, provide them with the resources so that they can succeed, release them back into society so they can become productive citizens. It's a very simple, very linear progression.
Exactly.
It's a model that should be easy for every state, Department of Corrections to follow. And it should reduce the cost of recidivism. It would actually, lead to more productive pursuits in society and make that society richer economically, culturally, and it would have that transformative piece to it.
In fact, I was invited into a prison in Oslo, Norway, where they has this exact model. And it was a woman's max security prison, and met with the warden. They're called governesses there. And she said, Diane, when I first get someone, within 2 weeks, I make sure that I've sat down with them and I've spent enough time with them so I know what they want to do when they get out. And the average sentence there is about 7 years. So they spend that time strictly doing that. Like, there was one woman that wanted to get into construction, and her job entailed using a tractor. So, they took down the barbed wire fences and brought it in so she could actually have hands on. But coupled with that, if my facts serve me correctly, within a couple years of being in prison, they will put you in normal clothes, take you out to their local town, and leave you for 2 hours. There's no correctional officers with you. You're not chained up, and then they come back and get you. And then slowly over time, you're offered more and more days. So there was a woman that was giving us a tour, and she actually came out shortly after we were, and she got in the car with her parents and was spending the weekend with them. And that's what I'm talking about. You and I were saying, like, you've got to be re-triggered a little bit, right? You've got to go back into those environments and see what your triggers are. And then if something happens, they bring her back in. Whereas opposed to here, I can see us shutting the whole prison down for a long time. That punitive punishment is something that really speaks to us here. So yeah, that's the perfect model.
Yeah, I think it is for sure. So that's what you call true rehabilitation. Breaking down the stigmas and the labels that go along with being a prisoner. But I think Norway, Denmark, they've got the United States beat, not only in terms of the rehabilitative pieces that they see with how with their with their prisons, but just in healthcare and education and everything else. So they're progressive to begin with, and we can learn a lot from them if we so choose. So I want to ask you, the prison podcast, am I correct? Is it out of San Quentin?
Yes.
Now, what I understand, please correct me if I'm wrong, it focuses on the transformative process of the victim-offender dialogue. Am I correct?
Yes.
Is that transformative process similar or different to restorative justice efforts?
I think they go hand in hand. So what happens with this prison podcast, and I hadn't planned to open up this nonprofit. I also hadn't planned to ever do a podcast. So I had been asked by a friend of mine, Miguel Quisada, who had been previously incarcerated. And with the access I have into the prison, he said, would you mind helping me escort some people? And we're having a day of healing. And I brought in about 10 women. And if you can imagine them on a stage, on a yard in our prison, and there's about 1,000 men in blue in front of them. And each one of them get up and tell their story, whether they're talking about being raped, whether they're talking about their daughter being killed by a drunk driver, whether they're talking about being molested. I mean, there was not a dry eye from anybody there. So on the way out, they asked me, Martina, and she's on one of our episodes, and wonderful woman. The knowledge that she has is absolutely remarkable. And she said, would you want to feature them on Humans of San Quentin? Would you interview them? And I instantly got chills because I told you early on, without being the victim of a violent crime or being impacted by incarceration, I'm really very petrified of re-triggering victims. So it was a little bit out of my realm, but like everything else in life, I said yes. And I found out really quickly that it wasn't something that we could just do written. So what happens is we interview them after they have already sat face to face with their perpetrator in prison. And Dave, the one thing that just shocked me out of it, I believe you and I both have a big torch for people in prison and are advocates for them for healing and release. There are women that I've interviewed that I do not hold a candle to what they're doing to get their perpetrator and hundreds and hundreds of people out of prison. So the kindness and the heart that I've seen from them. So they go back into prison again and again, educating, speaking, sharing their stories, touching people inside, so they therefore can work on themselves and help them be released. So it's restorative justice, right, at its finest. And it's just humankind, right? To look at someone and see where they're going through and meet them where they are, and then give them that. So, yes, I suggest people to listen to it only because the one thing that came out of me is the kindness that's really in people and the healing that it does. So, I sit down with Elle, whose daughter, Emily, was down in LA. She was, I think, about 20 years old, and she had met a girlfriend at Starbucks and walks out of Starbucks, is crossing the street, and gets hit and killed by Alan. Alan was a drunk driver. Elle did everything in her power to make sure that Alan was caged and put into prison. And she realized when she walked out of that courtroom that there was no justice done for her. And she had also been touched by alcoholism in her family, and she wanted to meet with him. And this is also going to bring me to tears. So it takes quite a long time, as you know, for two people on those far side of the spectrum to actually sit down and meet. So there's quite a bit of counseling and work that has to be done on both people's parts. And when you're first brought into the room, your perpetrator is actually shackled to a table and there's guards there. And they're actually given one other person to come in with them. And the person in prison is as well. And she sits down. She's got a binder with her that has pictures of her daughter hooked up to all the machines, taking her last breath. And she planned on showing him those. But the first thing she says when she sees this man at this table, she turns to him and she says, "You know, Alan," she's like, "I have a hug for you." So that is the epitome of what Elle is like. And Alan has now been released from prison. He will get to go and see his family and give them hugs. She'll never be able to hug her little girl. So to me, that is really what it comes down to in our society is really being able to put yourself in someone else's shoes.
Yeah, and to show that level of empathy and really just forgiveness, and I love you, I got a hug for you. That had to, I would imagine, for Alan, that really just make him feel, for lack of a better way to put it, like a human being again.
Yeah. Yeah. And that leads me to what happens next is Alan had to forgive himself,
Yep.
right? Elle forgave him, but that's the hardest thing I think for people to do in prison. In fact, there's this another guy that I've met with inside, a friend of mine, Dennis Jefferson, and he first wrote to us during the pandemic. And he has 3 daughters under the age of 5. He and his wife, Jasmine, it's a Sunday afternoon. He gets in a fight with her and ends up killing her. And he takes us through what he calls the red flag journals. So they're on our website and talks about everything that led him to that day. And at the end, he says, "Diane, I had to learn to hold my own hand."
Yep. And forgiveness is a lot of forgiving ourselves. A lot about that. It's holding our own hand and showing grace to ourselves, and even grace to that child that was traumatized at an earlier age, whether it was 5, whether it was 6 or 7. It's and forgiveness is really. I read a meme somewhere I thought that was pretty profound, and it goes something like, "Learn to forgive yourself for things that only time could have taught you." And you can't, and it's just that's just so profound to me.
Mhm.
Because how can you hold yourself hostage and feel guilty and self-loathing for things that only time could have taught you down the road, that you didn't know any better, or you just did what was natural to you at that time. So how could you have known it could have had any negative consequences? One, unless you experienced that. And then over time you learn to say, well, I can forgive myself because I didn't know any better then.
Yeah. That's huge. I'm going to write that down.
Yeah, and I can't take credit for that. I think it was a meme that I saw, and I think it was attached to a particular individual whose name escapes me right now. But I saw that, and I was just like, wow. You know,
Right.
I was just like, wow. I mean, that was very profound. And I share that now with anybody who has difficulty showing grace to themselves, loving themselves, and forgiving themselves. So
Yeah, I'm sharing that next week in our meeting inside San Quentin.
to me, that quote is just profound in its simplicity, but it's profound. The transformative power of storytelling in and of itself. Can you speak to that in terms of how you've seen it transform the lives of the humans that you deal with in San Quentin, and also and I think you've already talked about how it transforms the individuals who listen to it, but who listen to those stories. What does it do for the individuals who actually tell them?
Well, it can start with where you and I were before when I said I sit down with somebody and ask them how they are.
Well,
So if that hasn't been done, no one is also asking them to tell their story. So many times when I ask them, what do you want to talk about? What do you want to share? And they can't. They don't know where it is. They don't think they have anything to share. Where it's like, oh my God, you're like living true crime here in front of me. Like, what do you mean you don't have something to share? So for them, it's very muddy. But I also wonder if some of it's upbringing. Like, when I was in kindergarten, first grade, we went away for summer vacation and we came back. And what did you do? All my upbringing comes from an I statement. And you learn from your own self, your favorite color, what those things are in your life. And then as I'm raising teenager, you figure out what are your environments that you like? What are things that you crave? So that typically from the people that I know, that attention isn't giving to them. So when you sit down and you ask them to tell their story, it's revolutionary. I have another story I can share with you. So Freddie Lopez, we're in our meeting one week and he comes and usually we interview people and he says, I've already been interviewed and you've already put my story up, but I have a letter I want to read you. And he brings all of us to tears. And as you can tell, I'm an easy one to cry and an easy one to laugh. So he shares that his whole face is covered in tattoos and he gets sentenced and he realizes, oh my gosh, life's going to be much easier for me in prison because I'm going to be with my people. So when he was outside, he had kids, wife, everything would get dumped on him. He would be the first one to be blamed for things. He wouldn't get jobs. He would be bullied. There'd be gang members on him, everything. His life was difficult. So he comes to prison thinking, oh my gosh, it'll be easier. And he'd had quite a bit of experience in the restaurant business. So he goes into the cafeteria, applies for a job. And the woman working there says, I'm not going to hire you. She's like, you look like you're a bunch of trouble. And he's like, what are you talking about? I have letters of recommendation. This is what I do. And eventually he spends enough time and convinces her to give him a job. So she turns to him after X amount of time and says to him, Freddie, I really need to apologize to you. She's like, you're one of the best workers I've ever had. So at that time, he also sees one of our flyers on the wall and sits down that night and starts writing his story for the very first time. And he said it was just an outpouring of all the chips and all the anger that he had held on his shoulders that he didn't realize he was carrying around. So until he actually sat down and wrote his story to us, he didn't realize where he was and what he was then able to unload. So here he is standing in front of us, reading this letter of just thank you. Thank you for what you've done to me. And then obviously how it's changing you and I now, how it changed his family and his kids. And just that, being able to see himself in a softer spot is revolutionary. I mean, it's the oldest form of communication in our world, right? It's been handed down from generation to generation. So I think the more that we can keep that alive and in this case, share those traumas that let people know out there that it's okay. It's okay to hate yourself. It's okay to want to commit suicide. All those are things that you need to talk about that need to be at the forefront of our conversations, should they be on your mind, to really make our community safer.
and I think with Freddie's story, we can learn that we're not the people we're told we're going to be. It sounded like he had a lot of negative programming growing up, that he was going to be just a screw up. And I had a client that I worked with who said, I got scapegoated so much as a child that I kept hearing how bad I was. I said, what a screw up I was. He goes, I made it my mission to be the best damn screw up I could ever be, to reinforce what he had already heard. That got him into repeated challenges with law enforcement, contributed to his addiction. But once he was able to verbalize that, we were able to talk about that and say, you're not your programming. You're not who you were told you are. You are your own person. You can be empowered to change the narrative with some support and with some help.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
Exactly. Spot on.
Diane, I could probably talk to you for about another hour or so, but I know you probably got some things to do today. And I know you got at your house a family full of four-leggeds that you're taking care of today. So I want to make sure you thank them for me for allowing me to take you away from them. So
Thank you.
you're welcome. But my last question for you, or one of my last questions, You've left our listeners with a lot of great information, a lot of great teachings today. But if you're going to leave our audience with just one ultimate takeaway for today, Diane, what would that be?
Mm. The one word that comes up to me every single day is compassion. Drop the narrative. And it can be as easily as it is with your spouse or a child or any relationship, someone you have in your life. And I think people say this a lot, but you really never know what people are going through. And the depth of that is profound. That tied in with give someone a smile today. It might be the only one they get. Those two kind of hold together, right? If you're compassionate, you're smiling, hopefully we can make our world a little bit more positive.
Yeah, one person at a time. And that smile you give to somebody else is ultimately going to get passed down and then get passed down and get passed down further. So, all right, my last question, a little opportunity to promote yourself and also the Humans of San Quentin. If our listeners want to contact you, connect with all that is Humans of San Quentin, what's the best way for them to do that?
We love people to visit our website because the humanity and the thousands of people we have there is touching. So they can get a hold of us there. We have a email, hi@humansanquentin.com. You get directly to us. And we're also on all the social media channels. So you've touched upon our podcast. We're also on YouTube, Facebook. We're even up on Reddit a little bit. Joe, our employee, loved Reddit. We're also on Instagram and Patreon. If anybody wants to hear the inside stories, we put raw writings up on Patreon and then also LinkedIn. And we love to give talks. Like I told you, I really want these people that have healed and, like they say, hurt people, heal people, heal people. We really want to get on those stages. So I have men that want to come and talk. So thank you so much for offering this today. And you're right, I could sit and talk to you for a long time, Dave. You have experiences in this world that I would love to learn about. So thank you for bringing both our lives to light for so many people today.
And thank you for just a wonderful conversation today, Diane. I enjoyed it, and I hope we can do another one in the future.
Sure, I'm game. Thank you.
You're welcome. And with that, that's a wrap on another episode of the Teaching Journeys podcast. I'm your host, Dave Roberts, wishing you peace.